Hi guys, Harbs and Narbs here. Today we're going to be looking at what the Mind Flayers want, what their goals are, and why they would want to achieve these things. I'll be drawing on sources that date back to the 1980s, so some of this stuff is decades old, but I can only imagine that the writers over at Larian have pored over countless reams of lore before creating this game, and maybe they were even inspired by some of the older stuff. Please remember that these are all just theories. Okay, let's go. Number 1. Disease. From the cinematic trailer we can see quite clearly that something is not right aboard this Nautiloid. There are what appear to be deceased Mind Flayers slumped against the walls, and this sole Mind Flayer appears to be trying to run the ship on his own. Bear in mind that usually Nautiloids are run by 10 to 15 Mind Flayers. Perhaps this Mind Flayer is trying to revive his species. Would we not do the same? This Mind Flayer seems desperate, attacking a settlement on the material plane in the middle of the day with a dead crew. One major disease that does affect the Mind Flayers is called the Ashen, but it's far from deadly and is described in Brian R. Cordell's The Illithids as follows. An Illithid with a case of the Ashen has a few readily apparent symptoms, including a skin tone that fades from lustrous mauve to a pinkish humanoid flesh colour. More seriously, the Ashen temporarily inhibits an Illithid's mucus glands, rendering the Illithid nearly slimeless. This lack of slime is important as it impacts their psionic abilities, and while this Mind Flayer appears to have very dry skin, it's practically impossible to tell whether this is the Ashen, and even if it is, it's rarely lethal. In the grand scheme of things, the Illithids would not care too much about the Ashen, as they are far more concerned with other things that might affect them, such as partial personalities, but I'll talk about this later on in the video, as I don't view it as a disease necessarily, and it's certainly not one that actually kills Mind Flayers. So, whatever has killed these Mind Flayers has not affected this one. In fact, this Mind Flayer exhibits a major ability which makes it stand out from the rest of its species, as it seems to have absolutely no aversion to the light. It cannot be stressed enough how odd this is. In issue number 78 of Dragon magazine from 1983, it says the following: "The Illithids cannot tolerate light except in faint intensities. Their eyes are not like those of humans or elves. They have solid white abominations in place of eyes with no pupils visible. Our scholars have tested and dissected these eyes, and we find that they focus light in a strange manner, so that a sudden bright light will overwhelm the visual nerves and leave the creature in agony." According to Brian R. Cordell, Illithids only see on the infrared spectrum, and in direct sunlight they can only see up to 15 feet. So, has this Mind Flayer found a way to rid his race of one of their main weaknesses? Even Astarion, a vampire spawn who shouldn't be able to walk in the light, can now move around in it without problem. Maybe these new tadpoles will create Mind Flayers that are far stronger than what we have witnessed before, immune to this mysterious disease and able to move freely in the light. Their aversion to sunlight is further emphasized by Cordell in this quote here. "It behooves the Illithid race, as a superior people, to take matters into their own tentacles. The multifarious orbs of sunlight which illuminate a million worlds must be extinguished. Put out the sun, darken the light." This brings me on to number 2, the Sunset World. This is something that is spoken about extensively in Dragon magazine number 150 from 1989. And weirdly, it's not mentioned in many other places. It's a fairly long article written from the perspective of someone called M. Sungale, leader of the 9th Interplanar Expedition, who is giving a speech to academics of the Imperial Association for the Advancement of Arts Magical. This group travelled to a strange world which they coined as the Sunset World, but it's known to the local Illithids as Sirik Aqua. The explorers were led to this place by Githzerai guides who insisted that it was the home world of the Illithids. Sungale describes the world extensively and in too much detail to say it all here, so I'll cut it down to the key parts. Sirik Aqua's dim red sun causes them no more discomfort than torchlight would. unlike the vigorous light of our own day star, which would blind them and burn their skins. The only warmth is issued from the sullen fires of a swollen orb half the size of our own sun, perched a finger's width above the horizon. The group traverse around part of this world with the Githzerai, and they are met with various plants and creatures that appear to mimic traits held by the Illithids. The animals of Shrik Akur, particularly those of the Illithid-like body form, are often sentient or semi-sentient. Many are even resistant to magical or psionic attack. Some of the creatures are even psionically endowed. They observe an Illithid city which is on the surface given the lack of danger from the sun. However, the most important bit is at the end of the article, where Sungale discovers the ancient remains of humans, dwarves and gnomes. The skulls we found bore marks of Illithid predation. All these traces and remains were ancient in the extreme. There were also fragmentary skeletons of horses, cattle and geese. These bones were found within the confines of some very ancient structures, and therefore Sungale concludes that the Githzerai told them the wrong information, and that the Sunset World was in fact once much like the world where the explorers came from, and Shrik Akur had been altered by the Illithids. Sungale dispels rumours that the Mind Flayers wished to extinguish the sun, stating that the planet would become uninhabitable even for the Mind Flayers. Other sources, such as the Lords of Madness, says their peers might consider them insane, but a few Elder Brains actively work towards the goal of putting out the sun. Because this plot finds little acceptance among the wider Illithid community, Elder Brains that pursue it do so quietly. Even more disturbing is that Elder Brains may not be in any rush, since the sun and other stars will burn out on their own. All that's needed to bring about universal darkness is patience. Counter to this though, the Lords of Madness also says, some Illithids believe it would be more realistic to find ways for their race to exist comfortably and function effectively in the daylight. If you're thinking that this magazine is old and canon may have changed, well, Christopher Perkins, one of the D&D game designers, did confirm in an interview in 2019 that this mode of thinking is still present in 5th edition. Part of the grand design also involves transforming worlds into hospitable places for Illithids to inhabit. Extinguishing a world's sun is a great way to further this goal, as doing so snuffs out most other life on the planet and makes conquering that world easier for the Illithids. Maybe the Illithids of the Sunset World don't want to extinguish the sun. However, they have changed it beyond recognition. They did something to the sun and made it so that Illithids could roam the surface without fear of the bright light that probably once covered the world. Sungale finishes his talk with the following, referring to his own world. I look at the sun now and I wonder if it has grown somewhat redder. Are the days and nights longer than they were? As I contemplate these thoughts, a further chill runs the length of my body. Perhaps one day we too will dwell in a sunset world. Number 3. Revival of an Empire. The ancient Illithid Empire was big. So big that it is described in the Plane Treader as follows. Boundless Illithid influence enfolded worlds without number. Mind Flayer domination infested the astral, the ethereal, and even threatened the borders of the outer planes themselves. Vast planar armies marshalled to defend their respective realms, and even the eternal blood war was stayed for a time to assess the Illithid threat. Their empire was so big that it's hard to fathom how it even collapsed. Like most great empires in reality, it fell apart from within when the slave races revolted, and primarily the Gith annihilated the Illithids within a year, dismantling their huge reach across the stars. They were not completely decimated, however, and many Mind Flayers resorted to hiding on some worlds in the deepest of caverns. These isolated and small clutches of Mind Flayers who call the Underdark their home are not merely waiting, they are plotting. Volo's Guide to Monsters states the following. Once a colony is secure, it focuses on the grand design. The Mind Flayers plan to rebuild their empire. There are 3 aspects to this plan. Number 1. Control. Where a colony that desperately needs to increase its population captures humanoids to turn them into thralls and Illithids. Number 2. Destruction. Ways to cause mass casualties with minimal risk to themselves, such as plague or famine. Number 3. Subversion. A mix of control and destruction, where Illithids might engineer the collapse of a society's central authority by controlling certain elements of human society. In fact, in Descent into Avernus, we can see that a Mind Flayer is actually secretly controlling one of the Dukes of Baldur's Gate, a woman by the name of Balin Stelmane. We can also see this with the Gistev family in Baldur's Gate 2, as the Hidden, a Mind Flayer involved in a confusing and elaborate plotline that I talk about in my conspiracy videos, influences this noble family of Afkatla. What's most curious about Illithid society is that they have forgotten how to construct nautiloids, and yet we see one in both cinematics. In Volo's Guide to Monsters it says, "Nowadays a nautiloid is an incredibly rare sight. A colony in possession of one takes great care to keep it hidden, taking to the sky out of necessity." The Illithids have lost the secret of manufacturing nautiloids, meaning that the loss of any vessel brings them one step closer to remaining trapped on the material plane. Their grand plan really is the tip of the iceberg, and their true empire and goals may not even be known to the most powerful of Elder Brains. The Lords of Madness states the following: "At the very end of time, the Mind Flayers faced extinction at the hands of some unknown adversary. Caught in the throes of defeat, harried in their crumbling capitals and universities, the surviving Illithids concocted a desperate plan. As their last bastions were assailed and their psychic defences breached, the Mind Flayers sacrificed countless ancient, potent Elder Brains to produce a psionic maelstrom of unimaginable proportions. The ensuing cacophony of energy demolished the very laws that support the structure of time. The Illithids and all that remained of their decadent civilization were hurled backwards across the ravaged barriers separating the ages to arrive in the present world, but thousands of years ago, as recorded in the Sargon prophecies. The Illithids' staggering gamble paid off. Upon arriving in the human world of several thousand years past, they quickly enslaved the humanoid race known as the Gith. So, the Mind Flayer empire that we think we all know about was not even the first Illithid empire, and there may be an even greater plot afoot. What was this adversary that almost destroyed the first empire? The fourth and final point, the adversary. I mentioned back in the disease part that I would talk about partial personalities, something which is feared by most Mind Flayers. Usually these partial personalities manifest when the Illithid is dazed, groggy or preoccupied. During these circumstances, a part of the personality from the Illithid's old body pre-ceremorphosis may manifest. It is very rare for this to happen and normally would only consist of the tapping of fingers in a way reminiscent of the form donor, the humming of a tune familiar to the form donor, or the unconscious scribing of words in the form donor's native language. The reason that the discovery of a partial personality is so horrifying to a Mind Flayer is that their society will deem them unfit to join with an Elder Brain upon death. A dark legend exists within Illithid society that speaks of the adversary, and Brian R. Cordell describes it as follows. The adversary was an Illithid lost to itself. A partial personality of uncommon strength consumed a Mind Flayer's personality, and sought to overthrow all Illithids through the innocent guise of a fellow Mind Flayer. This Mind Flayer that we see in the cinematics could be the adversary. I don't necessarily believe that the adversary has to be a friend to the people of the material plane, to which this Mind Flayer clearly is not. It just has to be an enemy to the idea of the Elder Brain, the idea that Illithids should be subservient to an Elder Brain. The process of ceremorphosis is already different, and we can see that the protagonists are exhibiting an unusual amount of control over the tadpole in their head, an independence that might stay. Perhaps we just might see two factions of Illithids in Baldur's Gate 3, the ones striving for the return to their dominance in the universe by way of the Elder Brains, and then a new type of Mind Flayer. Thanks for watching guys. If you enjoyed this video then please feel free to give me a like and subscribe. Links to my other videos are in the description below. Thanks, bye!